When most people bring up the Disney classic Beauty and the Beast, most people will either think of how it's a wonderful movie that perfectly shows that beauty is way more than skin deep, or be reminded of all the jokes and analysis that this movie is actually about Stockholm Syndrome. And while most of the time when people say that, they are just making jokes, some people are dead serious when they claim that the relationship between Belle and the Beast is an unhealthy one and is based on abuse. And today, I'd like to at least try and put these views to rest once and for all, to the best of my ability. And there will be spoilers for this movie ahead. So if for whatever reason you plan on seeing this movie but haven't yet, you should probably click off the video. You have been warned. Alright, so to cut right to the chase, no. The romance in Beauty and the Beast has nothing to do with Stockholm Syndrome. Because simply put, Stockholm Syndrome is when one person holds another captive, abuses them, and then the captive starts to fall in love with the captor because they're not being as abusive to them. As in, they only beat them for 5 minutes instead of 10. So as you can see, it's an extremely unhealthy form of love. One of the worst, in fact. And as I just stated, this isn't what happens in Beauty and the Beast at all. Because while it's true that Belle and the Beast make a bargain for Belle to be his prisoner, he never really treats her like one. He doesn't abuse her, he doesn't try to psychologically torture her, and he makes no attempt to harm her in any way. And sure, he does yell a couple times and lose his temper, but one has to keep in mind that he has his own reasons for behaving like that. Because if there's anyone that's suffering from psychological torture in this story, it's the Beast, not Belle. Turned into a monster at a young age as his mind slowly starts to give way to feral instincts, all the while suffering from crippling insecurities and extreme depression. So, in essence, his extremely short and vicious temper is the result of both his mind falling victim to the spell and his only way of coping with what's happened to him. But deep down, he's not actually a bad person, and that's the whole point. Though obviously his losing his temper does nothing to endear him to Belle, and if anything only makes her less and less interested in wanting anything to do with him. And that's what's important to note here. A couple of times at the start, he tries to be nice to her, but she doesn't fall in love with him simply because of that. Because if she did, that might be considered Stockholm Syndrome. Instead, she's shown to be very confused by his attempts to be nice and remains scared of him no matter what mood he's in. She instead starts to see him as a person rather than as her captor after he does something that most people would be pretty grateful to somebody for. He saves her life. Sure, it's partially his fault that she tries to leave in the first place, but once again, that's the whole point. He feels genuinely guilty about having scared her and behaved the way he did, so to make up for it, he saves her from the wolves that undoubtedly would have torn her apart. And that's another thing to note here. He doesn't save her just so he can retake her as his prisoner. That's not his motivation at all. He does it pretty much just to save her from a horrible fate. And Belle knows that. That's why she takes him back to the castle of her own free will and tends to his wounds, because she's genuinely grateful to him for saving her life. And that's probably the Beast's first step in caring for her as well, because she's treating him as a genuine person instead of the monster he'd been convinced for 10 years that that's all anybody would ever see him as. And after that, she mainly stays at the castle to make sure he heals from his wounds. So from that point onward, she's no longer his prisoner, but instead staying at the castle of her own volition. The Beast even states as much to her later on. And it's while he's recovering that the two begin to fall in love. But once again, it's not because of any latent abuse or Stockholm Syndrome. It's because they've started to treat and see each other as people. Because he saved her life, Belle starts to see that maybe there's more to him than the monster he appears to be, and by being grateful for saving her, the Beast starts to see her as more than a means to break the spell. And that gratitude also ends up bringing out the best in what is ultimately just a deeply insecure and broken person. And it's only once that good nature has come out that Belle starts having any feelings for him. And for an example of that, take the library scene. It all starts simply because he wants to do something nice for her, and only to do something nice for her. Keep in mind that there are no ulterior motives for this. And after being told that she has a love of reading, he decides to gift her his entire library. And considering he can barely read and she loves to, he frankly couldn't have picked something more perfect for her. And that's the point. She ultimately ends up falling in love with him because of his kind and gentle nature, and she helped bring out that change within him. Honestly, it's a pretty touching story when you really think about it. Okay, so the point here is, the Beast and Belle's relationship honestly has nothing to do with Stockholm Syndrome. As I just went over, the Beast is never abusive to Belle, and Belle doesn't tolerate any of his bad behavior in the first half of the movie. It's only once he started being genuinely nice to her, and they start to see each other as actual people, that romance starts to blossom between them. Frankly, the whole thing has a lot more to do with the Florence Nightingale effect than Stockholm Syndrome, and actually reflects how a lot of people fall in love in real life. Think about it. Two people meet, see a bad temper and a means to an end, and quickly develop a dislike of each other. But after getting to know each other better and realizing there's more to the other person than they thought, they start to fall in love. Really, that happens in the real world all the time. The biggest difference here is that something rather extreme has to happen in order for this change to occur, that being his saving her life, but that's befitting the fact that they're also facing extreme circumstances, his being a beast and all. But what's important to remember is that abuse has no place in this relationship. That's what Gaston is for. As I've already gone over, she only starts to develop feelings for the Beast after he started being nice to her and she's no longer a prisoner to him. And even if she hadn't, it still wouldn't fit the description of Stockholm Syndrome because that has to involve abuse. And while he's pretty abrasive at first, his behavior never extends that far. In the end, this is most definitely not a story of a woman falling in love with her hideous, abusive warden, but about two unlikely people who bring out the best in each other after coming to understand that they aren't who they appear to be, particularly when it comes to the Beast. And that's another thing to note here. Part of the reason she falls in love with him is because he treats her like a person and likes her because of who she is. Keep in mind that her whole town only values her for her beauty and doesn't care about what she wants. The Beast, however, loves her for who she is on the inside and values her thoughts, company, and what she wants above everything else. In all honesty, when you peel back all the layers of their romance, you might just find one of the most healthy, unabusive kinds of relationships there is on screen. Which is a very far cry from the likes of Stockholm Syndrome. Okay, I think I've made my case crystal clear. So now I want to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that the romance depicted in Beauty and the Beast is actually the farthest thing from Stockholm Syndrome? Or do you still believe there's some unintentionally disturbing undertones to it? Please feel free to tell me in the comments below. And as always, you are free to have your own opinions on this matter, and you don't have to agree with me if you don't want to. And thank you all for watching. It is all greatly appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.